Welcome to Just Three Workplace Gurus, a podcast about the real world of work. My name is Mike,
I'm Amy.
I'm Vivian.
and today we are introducing a colleague and friend of mine, Regine Nelson. Regine and I have worked together at Couchbase for a couple of years. She manages internal communications and engagement for the company. She and I have worked quite closely over the last couple of years, and she has really also leaned into communicating with colleagues in her industry, talking about raising young family, working in tech, and we thought it'd be really enjoyable to chat with her about her experiences in the tech world and in the workplace. So welcome, Regine.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Anything else you want to add as an introduction to yourself?
Well, I am, as Mike said, I'm a working mom. I have three no longer very small children. They're all in middle school, three boys, and so that's always an interesting time. And I have been, as Mike said, just connecting with peers in the internal comms, people and culture workspace online. And I've learned a lot. I've shared a lot. And yeah, continuing to find my footing in the online landscape, as you will, as cringe as as I hate to say it, a micro influencer or thought leader, but I'm
Don't hate
loving
to
the
say
vibe.
it. Wear that proudly. You are a
Agreed.
thought
Agreed.
leader and an influencer.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your education, your background, how you got into tech and how you got into internal communications for people who don't know what internal communications and engagement.
Yes, definitely. So I'll start off with a definition of internal communications and engagement. So essentially, within an organization, there's internal communication and internal communications. And those two things emphasize how and what an organization uses to communicate with itself, which is internal communication. But internal communications is the strategic management of how that's done, right? So not just manager to employee, et cetera, but not only collecting information from the bottom up to share with senior leaders, but also making sure that everyone, including from the CEO to the recent intern who just joined, understands what their role is in moving forward the strategic objectives, excuse me, not objections,
Could be
of
objective.
their organization. So I like to call it, when you add employee engagement to it, it's a happy medium between some pretty serious stuff that you want to make sure people understand, and then the more squishy, fluffy things that you can do. So think DEI groups, big company events where you bring people together, not just to understand the business, but also to understand each other and work better as a result. And
And
so
now
that's
you're
right. And as you said, right, a little bit about how I got into it. A lot of people who got into internal comms came into it by sheer luck or happenstance, because internal comms, when I started working, was not really a formal function within organizations. You had individuals taking some facet of it, whether they were a chief of staff, an EA, if you will, taking on the charge of communicating things from the CEO or preparing their emails or what have you. So I started off in external communications. So think public
Mm.
relations. I worked in PR and communications for about 5 years before on the agency side. So that means that I got to work on a handful of clients at any given time. And it was a time to be alive, and a story for another day about how the technology has changed, because while I look very youthful, I started off in the time where I was faxing. A lot
Oh,
of
I
your
love
listeners
it.
will know what this is, but I was faxing press releases to media outlets. And now, you can email
Press
them
releases.
and, all kinds of things, right? But
Big
it was
changes.
definitely a time to be alive, to kind of get my chops in really connecting with the media and building relationships with folks that I did not know. I worked at a travel and tourism agency. So the unique nature about that is, not only did I have to conduct media relations with journalists and news and magazine writers, I got to be in their circle of orbit because we invited them to come visit our destinations. We hosted what was then called media fam tours. So, I got to go to the
That's
British
fun.
Virgin Islands and bring, a handful of journalists for a long weekend to see the sites and then be able to write about it in a realistic way because they had experienced it. Well, in the agency setting, I had the opportunity to work on a project, really putting together an internal newsletter in an email format. And I realized, oh my goodness, you mean to tell me I have an ecosystem that I can exact influence on and not have to worry
Right.
about sending out press releases and content into the ether and then having it fall where it may lay. And I was hooked. So I did a complete 360 and turned to internal comms, working at tech companies in the Bay Area where I lived at the time, Yahoo, Adobe, NetApp. And I had a really, really great time. But I took off 6 years off of work at the height of my career to
Wow.
raise those three boys because I had three children in an 18-month period. And so that does mean
Amazing.
twins, right? That's
I was
impossible if twins are not involved.
I was
And
doing my
so
math and it wasn't adding up, so I get you now.
yes, yes,
Wait a
yes.
second. So that's pretty intense, and that was a very courageous move,
Yeah,
and a wonderful move. Which I think I just want to pause on this for a second because
yeah.
there's a growing, I think, courage for women to sort of reclaim that and say, we talk, Mike, a lot about like FOMO, right? But like, at the height of your career to say, wait a second, I got to pause. I have a different priority now. Yeah. So was that a hard decision for you or was it crystal clear?
The decision at the time when I made it was not very hard at all. It was something that my husband and I had discussed prior to, and even getting into the mental, emotional, and physical state to even be able to conceive required stepping
Mm,
back.
I see.
And so, I was able to do that and I was rewarded for my efforts, with a 2 for 1, right?
And then another. Right.
And so, I'm not remiss to know that, taking that time off, being able to do that was definitely a privilege. It was a generous opportunity that I had because of what my husband did
Mm,
for work. He worked in tech as well, very senior leadership roles at some tech companies. And so I was afforded that, opportunity. And I see it as a pure blessing. But, at around a year when my son was a year old and I was pregnant with the twins, I had a moment of, "Oh my goodness, is
yeah.
this going to be the rest of my life?"
Mm,
Right? And I sort of had a little bit of resentment
mm,
because I did want to go back into the workforce, but I knew that these young minds, this ecosystem that I had to use my same skills to kind of
mm,
help bring them up in our family's faith, in our family's norms, right? And so while I did have a moment of panic, it was more like a couple of months of panic. And of course, you have twice the hormones when you're pregnant with twins, right? So everything
oh
seems
gosh.
immediate. So, and
Double
so
crisis.
I settled into that and said, okay, this is going to be my life. I'm going to make the most of this. I'm going to find, when they're a little bit older, fulfillment and philanthropic work, which I did, which was fantastic. I co-led my church's mothers group with 300 stay-at-home moms in the Bay Area for a couple of years, and it was
Wow.
fantastic. And, I honestly did not think that I would be going back to
Mm,
work full time again in the capacity that I am now. Right.
interesting. Okay.
And so what does that look like practically? It looks like, sort of divorcing myself from the professional working world, right? LinkedIn going dormant, really focusing my time on, helping other stay at home moms transition, right? Building my community there. And so I thought, yeah, like I don't need to, keep in severe close contact with these individuals. This is going to be my new life now. But when the twins turned 5 and I realized I was going to have quite a bit of time on my hands during the day,
Mm,
and I wanted to do something that was a little bit more fulfilling and that would sort of give me an identity outside of the one that I had had for the last 6, 7 years. And so, I told my husband and I told my kids, I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go back to work. I'm going to start taking a look to see what's out there. And they were all confused. They were like, well, but mom, what does that mean for us? Right. Which is
mm.
exactly what employees ask, right? When there's a change in an environment that they're used to. And I told them, I said, well, number one, I'm still going to be your mom. And number two, I'm still going to love you. Right. But yeah, so I brought everybody along, right? I'm still going to be your mom. I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to be here, but I'm also going to be helping other people who are not in our family, right? And so I took them on the journey, I included them. I said, okay, I put together a spreadsheet. I've got a ton of spreadsheets, you guys. ADHD is my superpower. In some instances, I think it can be my downfall. But anyway, neither here nor there.
Spreadsheets are
So
your savior. Yes.
yes, And so I put together a spreadsheet. And I said, these are the jobs that I've applied to, which, by the way, at the end ended up being over 250 jobs, okay, during this time. All right. And every time they would come home from school, they would say, Mom, who said no to you today? Because the
Love it.
name of the game was collecting all the no's so we
Yeah.
can get to the yeses, right?
What
And
what a
so,
great life lesson you
yeah.
provided right there, right? Which is, don't get defeated. This is actually a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so they were so happy. But then yes, at the end of that arduous journey, fortitude was my main solace, man. I had to just keep going through there. 4 months of all of this and the kids like in my face every day, like let us see the red on the spreadsheet. Was able to secure 3 offers, right? This was over 80 interviews. This was a full-time job, okay?
Yeah,
Was
I'll
able to
say.
secure 3 offers and went with the offer that was the most suitable offer for our family, meaning that it was fully remote. Family was of huge importance and value to this organization,
Mhm.
so I could have time, to go pick up the kids from school. I got the first day of school off, right? So that way you can go
Oh my
take your
gosh.
kids to class, etc. Yeah, it was an amazing European headquartered tech company, of all things that provided these wonderful benefits. I got to travel to Croatia, a few times
Wow.
for some leadership meetings and what have you. But, I think I showed my kids that you can do hard things and not be broken by it, right? And that success doesn't come immediately, right? Because I'm sure
Right.
in their little minds, they assumed mom's going to apply for this job because mom is awesome and mom's going to get said job. And that's not how the cookie crumbles. Ladies and gentlemen, I got, tons and tons of rejection, but I think that, there's a gentleman on YouTube that was doing this exercise where he was afraid to, ask people for things or to ask for what he wanted. And he spent like, I want to say it was a long period of time, a month or two, literally asking people to do things that he never thought that they would do. And they did. Like he knocked on
Interesting.
somebody's door and said, Hey, can I play soccer in your backyard? And the person said, Yes, go
Just as an
ahead.
exercise? Wow. To
Right. Yeah,
train
just as an
himself to,
exercise.
well,
He wanted to desensitize himself from rejection sensitivity, right? A lot of people, right? They get one hint of rejection and then
they don't
it
ask
changes
anymore.
the trajectory of their lives. And I think that is a disservice when literally on the other side of discomfort is success. And sometimes that discomfort is no, not you, not today, right? But if you keep going, it certainly won't be not ever, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I also want to just call out, I love how you frame this to your children
Mhm.
because you didn't go in with any apology. It was because a lot of working parents, and I say parents now because I think maybe this is not popular. I think moms tend to struggle with this more than dads, but I am finding that dads are way more involved in their kids' rearing than ever before. And I
Yeah.
think the struggle actually can now be either parent, which is beautiful, actually, as it should be. But that there was no apology. It's like, I love you and I'm just always going to be here, but I'm also going to help others. Like everything about that is positive rather than like, hey, you're not going to see me as much. Like there was none of that. It was just
No.
and then you developed your like this cheerleading squad. I think it's
Yeah.
fantastic. Anyway, go ahead.
And
Well,
I
I
just
wanted
wanted to
buy-in,
add,
Vivian.
yeah,
What was that, Amy?
I was just going to add to like you gamified it for the
Yeah.
kids. And so they
And
really
myself.
kind of bought into it. I'm curious, 6 years later, I think you said it's been 6 years. What is that like now for them, that
Yeah.
process? What lessons do you see them that they
Mm,
learned at that time that you're seeing through your kids now?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, right? Because I think, now that they're in middle school, they're having things brought to them, new experiences that they're more open to as
Mm,
opposed to being fearful to. I'll give you
yeah.
an example. This yesterday, anyway, they did a K-pop Demon Hunters variation of a spectacular show at school, right? It
Okay.
was an hour long, and this was the first time that the school has done something that has musical elements to it, and children had to sing and dance on stage in front of everyone. And my son, Joshua, he was the character Genu, which was the male lead. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
he was one of the folks who raised his hand first. Because here's the other thing. I try to give my kids opportunities that I would have hoped to have had when I was a
Mm,
kid. I'm a member of Toastmasters. They have been to Toastmasters with me when
wow.
their school is out on a Friday, and that's when my club meets. I bring them with me, and they get a chance to practice their public speaking and get a
My God.
chance to, like, say no to fear, right? And yes to curiosity and trying new things. And so I think for them, the lessons that they've learned is you're not going to die if someone tells you no, and you don't need to be afraid prematurely of someone saying no or you can't or a negative response,
Yeah.
right? And so anyway, they had like basically a standing ovation at this show. Everybody was so happy. I mean, of course, it's a
Amazing.
very popular form of entertainment right now, this particular Netflix show, but I want them to always know that they can do the hard things, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Even when the world says you can't, you can do the hard things. And sometimes that means doing
Yeah.
the things that other people won't do
And
or doing the things that we think we can't do.
well, and that you can survive mishaps. I'll digress for 1 second. When I was in conservatory studying music, and I did I I'm a pianist, and so I was accompanying a violinist, and we were playing one of the Brahms violin sonatas, and we sail through the first movement, everything's beautiful. We sail through the second movement, we get to the third movement, and as a pianist, when you play chamber music, you often have the music, and then there's somebody sitting here, if you're using a paper score, who's turning your page. Now we have iPads and foot pedals and all that good stuff. But anyway, so, now we're in the third movement, everything's great. And I had this moment of horror when I realized that on the left side of the page, it said like page number 47. And on the right side, it said something like 62. And I was like, I don't have this memorized. And I'm like, meanwhile, I'm playing and the music's progressing. And I kind of out of this side of my mouth say to the page turner, where's page 49 to whatever? And he goes, oh, crap. And I'm getting now further down to the page and I'm about to jump off the cliff. And it's just not there. And he's like looking and looking. Anyway, I jump off the page. The harmonies are okay for a minute. And then they get more and more crooked. And the violinist is staring at me like, what's going on there? And then finally, I have to pull my hands off the keyboard. And I turn to the audience, about 500 people out there, and I go, I'm really sorry, but page 49 to 62, I think we're back in the practice room. And there's this pregnant pause. And then 500 people together burst out hysterical laughing. I think I'm going to die. And she's like staring, anyway, we go, I said, we'll be back. They laugh again. We go, we get the music, we come back, we finish. They give us the standing ovation of standing ovations. And then I remember she said, well, come to the reception after. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm never going to be seen again. But then I realized that's the worst that could happen. I survived.
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
sort of took the fear away. It's like
Mhm.
capsizing in a sailboat. And you're
That's
like,
right.
okay, well, all right. Now I'm not so afraid. So anyway, to your point, I think failure is really important.
Your comment, Vivian, what's the worst that can happen is a recurring theme in this family. We talk about it all the time. I say, okay, we're in a situation. What's the worst that could happen? And I used
Mm,
to say to my wife, what's the worst that could happen? We'll have to move in with your mother. And, that sort of is the
that's
weight
it.
that that you acknowledge. And it does sort of give you, I don't know if that's like the bottom of the barrel, but it tells you where you are. It helps you sort of gauge. And I think that's really helpful. I wanted to say that, I've known Regine for going on 3 years. And while I haven't met her husband and the boys, I know a lot about what happens in this family. And it's really inspiring the way they raise these guys and how they connect with them and how they share. And I do think that is so helpful. I had a really interesting conversation with my family. This is not really been shared on the podcast, but I have left Couchbase and am some weird limbo of semi-retirement, looking for new consulting work, etc. Which means I'm not working with Regine every day, which is unfortunate. But I had a conversation with my family about what the history of working in tech has been, and how up and down it's been, and how valuable it's been for us as a family, but that the downside of all those valuable moments is, it's a little chaotic, and you don't always know where you're going to land, and what's good. Consistency is not our friend when we work in technology. And so I do think, to the point that you were making, Viv, earlier about the kids, that now that my kids are in their, late 20s, they do have a good sense of what I was trying to do as a working dad when there was, for the most part, a stay-at-home mom. We made sacrifices in order to make that work. And I think now they look back, and I don't know that they ever resented any of that, because I did make efforts to do things with them when I could, but I think now they really understand it. So sometimes there's also this delayed response, because someday they realize, oh, this is what my parents were doing for us.
Yeah.
Now we're doing a whole episode on child rearing, which I don't think was what we intended, but I love it.
No,
It's great.
but it's a big piece of just, it's also, I think, Regina, a lot of what I'm taking away from you, and you're very inspiring, by the way, is like how you frame things and the attitude going into things. So anyway, okay, so I don't even know where we took you off from, but
Well, I will say she's grooming the future workforce.
I'm
So
growing, exactly.
I appreciate us spending some time on this, because this is who we get to work with in the future if people follow Regine's parenting. So thank you.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so to close off on, my education, Mike, that you talked about, during this time, the kids have seen me go back to work. They have also seen me go back to school. And what that looks like is my undergraduate degree was from Florida State University, and it was in English literature. And I had a master's program that I initiated 2 years after graduating in marketing, integrated marketing and communication management. And, I love education. I love learning. And something that I always wanted to acquire was an MBA. And so when I was working at Visa, I had the most amazing experience there. And a part of their benefits package was tuition reimbursement.
Phenomenal.
And so I told the kids, I said, hey, you know what? I am going back to school, and work's going to pay for it. And they were like, what does that mean? Like, are you going into a classroom, et cetera? And I said, not entirely. I'm going to do an online MBA program. And that means I'm going to need some time to study. Just like you guys are doing your homework, I'm going to be doing my homework too. And that means when I have exams to take, you guys are going to have to be very quiet, because there's going to be a proctor with me in the room. And so, they would ask me what I'm studying, what I'm learning, and I would share some things with them. My older son is whip smart. So I think in the course of that year, he got himself a mini MBA as well, just because he was just so curious.
I love it.
I think, again, right, for us, we are a reading family. So the kids are always reading, and that's something that I allow them to do anytime that they want, right? Television is relegated to Friday and Saturday and Sunday if we don't have a full, type of activity going on between church and their activities and whatnot. And so, them seeing me go back to school shows them that even in an older age, you can still get education. You can still go back and learn something new. And you still get tests and exams and everything, right? They were shocked by that. They were like, I don't understand. Why are they also giving you papers to write, right? And exams to take? But I think it's important for kids to see that, because I never knew my parents getting education after I was already here. I didn't think that was a thing that, parents did.
Well, I'd like to interject how valuable it is, because my mother, due to her circumstances growing up, had to drop out of school at 13 and help support 6 kids, 2 parents, 2 grandparents, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
At 29 years old, after we were born, my sister and I, she went back to high school. She then went on to college. She then got a master's. She then got a second master's. All the while, there's always a hot meal on the table and was always with us. And anyway, and then was an ABD, all but dissertation. So I can't tell you how inspiring and motivating that was for me when I would like whine about this, that, or the other. I'm like, wait a minute, my mother and back was like, oh, it's great for your children. And I say this as a child of somebody who modeled that. And kudos.
But yeah, and this is all kinds of information and details that I'm super vulnerable and transparent with on LinkedIn. And as a result, I've gained a pretty decent following there because I'm just sharing my experiences, what I've done, what has happened to me, what has worked well from a work, internal comms, and engagement perspective. I love the people in culture space, right? I love helping people to grow and align in that area. And quite frankly, it's so much fun. You get to work with cool people like Mike, right? And learn from them as well. And he is right. We've known each other for a couple of years and he is one of my dear friends. And I was telling somebody the other day, I was like, it's so crazy, we're in different seasons of life, but like, I know I can text them and say, oh my gosh, can you believe this happened? Right. Or like, isn't this so funny? But the other thing too is like Mike said, like while, he knows my husband, Christopher, and of him and of these things, right? The beauty of this sort of environment that we're in where remote work, hybrid work is a possibility is that you get to share more of your personal life and your full self with your colleagues. And sometimes a random kid pops in and says, hello, hi, Mike. Or is that Jen or Fidelma? Because I hear an Irish accent, but I don't know the quite sounds of their voices yet, right? But it's little things like that. And it just makes it endearing, right? So it's nice, because I'm like, Mike likes to go and do his holiday events, right? Up north. And it's like, okay, let's go. I know a restaurant he and his family like to go to, right? So it's these little things that make the work fun. And allow you to really transform how the employee experience is and how the communications are delivered too. Because when you know someone, then you can communicate to them more effectively. And not saying that Mike spoke or speaks for, all of the Couchbase employee base, but what I'm saying is Mike is a glowing example of the relationships that I've built while I've been there with him.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I think there are people who don't want to do that level of connection, but for those of us who do, the value of getting to know each other better, I think certainly helps us. It's the engagement part of your job, for, in some ways, all of our jobs. We learn more about each other, and I think we communicate better, we work better together. It sort of eliminates some of the drama because we just sort of know each other well enough to understand the personal lives and how that affects us. And to Amy's point, it makes us more well-rounded as a team, and it is the future of how people are going to work.
I agree. And it humanizes it all, which is great.
Very
We're in this
much.
together. We're friends. We're colleagues. We're,
I think we've said this. Go ahead,
I'm
Amy.
curious from you as a micro influencer or thought leader, tell us a little bit about what that journey has been like. I mean, you started off faxing, so I'm sure that being a micro influencer wasn't part of your original education.
No, it was definitely not a part of my education, and it was definitely not on my bingo card. I tell you what, I can suffer from imposter syndrome like many of us. And posting on LinkedIn and sharing my ideas and my thoughts was something that I always wanted to do, not to the capacity that I'm doing it right now. I didn't know that it would look like this, but it's something that I always wanted to do, but I was very afraid to do, right? And I kept psyching myself up to do it and then would go to pull the trigger and say, no, I got to make it better. I've got to, this one needs to be perfectly crafted to go out the door, right? For the very first one, because you put so much pressure on yourself, right? And then it wasn't until a year into my time at Couchbase that I was invited to apply for this internal leadership program, development program that we have called Amplify, where they pair you with an executive coach for 6 months. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And I sat down with the coach the very first time and, she asked me what were some of my goals. I said, well, these are my work goals. And then I have one personal goal that I want to work on as well. And she said, "What?" I said, "Well, executive presence and self-branding." And she goes, "Okay, we can incorporate that in too, because that seems like it's a work goal as well. We can definitely do that." And so, I told her what some of my thoughts were and what some of my hiccups were as a result of having those thoughts, right? And essentially, I'll summarize this for you. My hiccups were, number one, I didn't see anyone that looked like me in my space that was doing this. So what I mean by that is physically, you can see that I'm a Black woman. Yes, I didn't see that, but I also didn't see people talking about they're also a parent doing this work. They also have ADHD doing this work. They also have, they express their faith while doing this work, right? And so I didn't see anybody that was doing that. And the coach, she said to me, she said, "Well, you're sitting here waiting for someone who looks like you, but do you know that someone is waiting for someone exactly like you?" And I was
Nice.
like, "Bop me
Nice.
over the head, why don't ya?"
Very
And
good.
so, yeah. And so I said, "You know what? She's right." And I'm always telling my boys, Nelsons do hard things. I'm going to do this hard thing with the caveat that I'm going to tell people, "Hey, I'm about to do this really hard thing. I'm actually doing it right now. And I'm really scared and I'm really nervous. And here's why I'm scared and nervous." And people really resonated with that. Right. And so then I kept writing some more, and I kept, my second or third post was basically about how I went back to work and, the story that I shared with you guys. And that was my most viral post. I had so many women coming into my inbox saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. That's something that I've always wanted to do." Or, "I didn't take time off because I was afraid that I was going to be able to get back in. So I just kept working." Right. And then I had of the, several inbox messages and comments on that post, I had 2 or 3 men come into my inbox and say, "So I'm not a mom and I didn't take time off, but I switched careers for a little bit to try something and I don't like it anymore. I want to go back to what I was doing before. And your post helped me to realize that I can do that." Right. So it was very, very fascinating. But I've done since just a mixture of what pops into my head, what happens from a conversation with someone, a post in reaction to someone else's post, right? That I click with and I want to kind of dissect a little bit further. But it was not something that I said, "This is what I'm going to be doing." I've been invited to speak at conferences. I've been
My
invited to be on
goodness.
podcasts, right? And I've had tremendous support from my colleagues like Mike and from our senior leadership as well.
Fantastic.
So I have a large number of folks who work at Couchbase who follow me and who either comment and ping me at work and say, "Oh my gosh, like this post was really good." I've even had people
Exciting.
ping me and say, 2 people in particular at Couchbase, they ping me and they said, "I love how you talk about your faith like that online. And like, I'm a Christian too. And I would love to, do a prayer walk with you when you're in the office next, et cetera, et cetera." So it allows people to see a different facet of me personally, right? And to connect with that and to also give them to a certain extent permission to be vulnerable, uh, to be their authentic selves as well. So it's been a wild journey because there are some people on there that I've met and I'm like, "We're BFFs." And then you meet them in real life and you're like, "We are." It's a you underestimate how much putting out content, and if you don't put out content, even if you just interact with people who have put out content in the comments, how much you are really building and developing those relationships. Because Netflix, because LinkedIn is a networking
That is what
platform,
it's about. Yes.
but really it's a relationship building and enhancing platform, right? And so I don't take that lightly or for granted, but yeah, I just love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Fabulous.
It really is fascinating to me over the years that I think most of us don't realize the amount of influence we can give. And that in many ways, the feedback that comes back to you is probably the greatest gift that you get. I started writing articles for LinkedIn maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And I remember the first one I wrote, that hitting send is really hard to do. It's the same when we did our first podcast recording. This is episode 22.
Right.
What will happen if when we hit that button, what are people going to say? And then you suddenly realize there are always going to be detractors, but the positive feedback that you get. I wrote an article years ago about job search and treating the job search like a job. The feedback that I got on that article was fascinating, and it really made me feel good about sharing that. And there were, I would say, at least a half a dozen people I knew who messaged me and said, you've taught me something about how I need to manage this. And I hadn't thought about it that way before. I'm going to completely change how I look at my job search. And so I think I always feel like we get more. It's like mentoring. I do a lot of mentoring, as Regine knows, and I get more out of being the mentor than I think I get. I don't know what they seem so gratified to have someone telling them they can do it. And that's it's a great feeling to be able to help promote that. So the feedback that you get, I think, is awesome.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, we're coming to the end here. And so I wanted to give you a minute or two. What kind of advice do you give particularly for women in a position like yours? How to lean in, how to connect, how to communicate, how to make it all work?
Yeah. I think number one is be kind to yourself. Have grace, because in reality, to make everything work, sometimes you have to borrow from Paul to pay Peter. And that's okay, right? That's definitely okay. So don't beat yourself up about it. I don't think, when you have passions, when you have work, when you have life, I don't think there's a such thing as balance between those things. It's more of a symbiotic relationship. And so sometimes something takes more and sometimes something gives more. And so I think definitely having grace and understanding that you can do anything, but you cannot do everything. I repeat, you can do anything you want to, but you can't do it all, and definitely not at the same time, right? Like, I make space for bad days. I make space for when things don't go my way. I'm in a season of life where I don't know if I can say this on, a recording. I've said it in multiple places, but I'm in
Go for it.
perimenopause. And so that means sometimes my life is a little crazy in my body, right? And so I think that giving yourself grace and, making a plan and not being beholden to it when you do. Those are the things that I would say, because like I said, I did not have a plan for what it would look like when I started posting on LinkedIn. And even now that I am almost a year into posting, I have a loose plan, but I am not holding so tightly to that plan that when change comes or I need to pivot, that I can't do that with ease.
Very, very, very important.
All awesome stuff, Regine. Thank you so much for doing this with us, for having this chat. It was really fun and interesting and engaging. And we've talked a lot about child rearing, which is very cool.
No, this is great. And when we post the program notes, we'll post a link to your LinkedIn for any listener or viewer who wants to check out your wonderful posts and get inspired by them. So hopefully you'll reach even more people.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank
Thank you for sharing.
Well,
All
thanks
right. Thank
very
you so
much.
much.
And we'll talk to all of our listeners, viewers again soon. Take care.